Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of A Little Jaded. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jade Zalewski, but as you might have noticed, we've taken a little bit of a break from posting both this podcast and blogs and on our other social channels. But the reason for that is because there's been a lot going on. As you know, Jaded Productions is comprised of aspiring music industry professionals. So we have all been balancing jobs and school and other things that are helping us to enhance our careers in the music industry. Don't worry though. We've been spending our time in this little lull trying to make better content for you guys and more content, which is why one of our little changes has been incorporating more voices onto our podcast. So if you're watching on YouTube or just listening wherever you find your podcasts, you'll notice that the other voice today is actually not Joanna, it's Kelly from our team. So you'll be hearing a lot from Kelly, but also other members of our team that might jump on. But yeah, today it's me and Kelly, our CBO.
Hi everyone, long time no talk. We're excited for all of these changes and to also be bringing back our more topical podcast episodes, focusing on relevant happenings in the music industry, artists who are killing it right now, and much more. But what won't be going away are our interviews with professionals from various areas of the industry. In fact, today we are joined by Cielo Perez, who will be discussing her experiences as a music journalist. But I will throw it over to Jade to introduce her.
Yeah, so as Kelly said, I'm so excited that we're joined by Cielo Perez today. She's been working as a freelance music journalist for the past year. She specifically has a knack for covering topics in the K-pop world and has interviewed artists such as DPR Ian, Monsta X, Stephanie Poetry, TXT, and more. And her work has been published on online outlets such as Paste, NYLON Manila, and the Recording Academy. Thanks for being here, Cielo.
Thank you guys so much. Yeah, I think I've known most of you guys for a good while, so it's nice to actually share my experiences and try to give inspiration for those who might want to pursue a similar path that I do. So,
Yeah, we're really excited to hear from you today.
Yeah, as Jade said, you've progressed to incredible new heights in your career in such a short amount of time. You've been working as a journalist for about a year now, and you've already had the opportunity to interview artists like Benet backstage at Coachella. Can you tell us how you found your way into this area of the industry, and what do you think has helped you flourish?
thank you so much for that question, Kelly. So, I would say this all started actually so I'll just give you some backdrop. So, I actually used to be a radio show host when I was in college. So, I did that primarily in 2 years. And the thing is, radio is under the same category as the media field. So it's like there's journalism, there's radio. So anything that falls in that category is very similar. And then, when I was a college radio show host, like we're always interviewing like local artists and we're always like going to shows, like writing reviews and photographing artists. And I remember like, because at that time, I was actually the marketing director as well. And at that time, like we were just coming back from COVID. So this is like fall of 2021. And I remember as a marketing director at that time, and I was just like, we had so few members, is like, how can we actually reach out to these artists and actually interact with them more? So I spent pretty much that entire year trying to like reach out to like bigger labels because we already had an alumni network that helps us out with that. So I was reaching out to them and do these things. And then by the time the spring semester rolled around, I was just like, maybe I should try like photographing artists on stage. So that's when I started like emailing out to artists like, hey, I would love to photograph artists, like, and just even a smaller artist, and they're like, sure, we can do that as long as you write a review about us, like we can promote in our socials. And it's just built from there, and it just started from there. And then even after the end of each project, I like to call it each project because it's a collaboration of everyone involved, I would always be like, hey, I would love to stay in touch through LinkedIn or like your socials. Like that's another thing that comes to networking. It's like I always think about longer term, like we just don't stop there. So there's actually opportunities down the line. But yeah, but pursuing, especially for music journalism, there's not actually a clear path of where to go. I'm just very fortunate enough that like it just I was very blessed like how quickly I grew,
Mhm.
even especially with K-pop. So I'll just give you a background about that. I actually did not get into K-pop until March of last year, but I actually just saw similarities between how I grew up listening to boy bands like One Direction and NSYNC, and that kind of like translated over to K-pop. So I was just like, okay, this is kind of like a grown-up version of why I like boy bands in the first place. So um, yeah, and it just grew from there, and I was actually posting a lot on LinkedIn. And then, obviously because this is where I was just like, I didn't know who to look to. So I would just post it consistently in LinkedIn to see if someone's going to notice. I was just like experimenting, and that's when people started picking up, but I can definitely explain more about that path. So yeah, there's not really a clear path of how to pursue this. It's just pretty much a mix of like everything. So
Yeah, I think that's great. It's so inspirational, I feel like, to the audience of aspiring music industry professionals to hear that there's no one clear path, because I feel like sometimes you look at people's stories and you're like, oh, I should be so much further ahead in my career right now, or I just comparison. There's a lot of comparison and imposter syndrome and stuff, but we'll get into that later. But you mentioned that you've been a freelancer, but you've also written for publications. Specifically, like you'd mentioned, or Kelly had mentioned earlier, that you'd gone to Coachella and done an interview backstage. So I was just wondering, what's it like to work under publications, and what's the difference between freelancing and writing for a publication, and is there any like funny story you have about writing either way?
yeah, so I'll explain the event side of it, because even as a freelancer, you are still allowed to cover the festival in itself, but like because each festival, like I this is kind of like I'll just be honest with you. A lot of festivals are very picky who they approve to cover the festival. So unless you're from like Rolling Stone or like Pitchfork, then obviously they're not going to allow that. But because the outlet I was working with at that time was, I showed them that like I was very capable of doing that. Like, just I already built this network so much that they were already respected my work, and they're like, yeah, no, like we'll help you apply for Coachella and those kinds of things. And when you're covering an event like Coachella, I mean, obviously the stakes are high, right? Like it's a lot of preparation too. It's like you're not just going there to like go see the artist, but you're also there spending the entire like, because Coachella was like 3 days, you're spending almost the entire 2 or 3 day weekend like networking, balancing things out, because the industry things just, there's always something happening every day. So it's like you have to be like organized in that sense. So like even that week of when I was going to that event, like I had to make sure I had everything. I need to make sure I had my laptop, I make sure I had my notebook, and then just in case if there's no cellular signal, because festivals, that does happen, so you have to be prepared like just for anything, but also getting plenty of sleep, like yeah. So because being a journalist in itself, not just as a music journalist, but as a journalist, like we lose a lot of sleep. So sometimes like we have like, this has happened to me before. I interviewed an artist like 5 a.m. in the morning when it was like nighttime, like overseas. So yeah, it's a lot of preparation, like taking care of yourself. That's why I tell people is like, make sure if this is something you want to do, there's gonna be obviously not the not so fun part, which I've been explaining about. So just making sure you also take care of yourself, because it is very demanding. And then like you can also get lost in the mix as well if you don't have like a specific goal in mind. So when I was going to Coachella, I'm like coming in just like I don't know anyone. Also, quick tip, I highly recommend this if you're the type of person that doesn't like to talk a lot. So what I did was I literally printed out like 200 business cards, and I would just put them on like people on the tables, because there's always press tables. That's how you network, especially if you're an introvert. So it's just a quick way of being like, hey, this is my elevator pitch, have a good day. So because it gets chaotic, because you don't have time to like talk to like other people, like other journalists or other artists. So it's just a good way to just put yourself out there without quote unquote trying too hard. So but on the freelance side, you're always like constantly pitching, but each whether if it's like a fashion outlet, a music outlet, like you have to make sure what the topics that you're pitching to is very relevant to their audience. Like it doesn't make sense if you just try to pitch a hip hop artist you want to interview in a rock music outlet. So when I look at these outlets, I study. It's kind of like homework. Like you look at their website, what artists they cover. Like for example, if they're doing pop culture, obviously like, you know, you want to like offer topics about like the internet and stuff. But yeah, it's kind of like a lottery. And I'm not gonna lie, it is pretty hard. But you know, I've been blessed that like a lot of these places that I've pitched my ideas and get published were very welcoming of my ideas. But I tell people it's like if you really have to like do your research, study, especially if it's someone you look up to, like for example like Pitchfork, like that's like my number one goal one day. But it's a constant battle because you're not just one writer, you're going up against like 1,000 writers or freelance journalists out there. So it's definitely a constant battle, but you have to make sure you stay focused with what goals you want, because you know you can definitely get lost in the mix. That was a big long answer.
No, I think that was great. And just a quick question leading off of what you said, you know, as somebody who is not at all a freelance music journalist, but wants to know more about how it works, you know, similar to some of our audience right now. Do you pitch to a publication when they're asking for pitches, or is it more of like a cold call, like, hey, I'm Cielo, this is what I can do for you, like, let me know if you're interested kind of thing?
So it's actually a mix as well, because like usually at the end of each month, a lot of editorial outlets will be like, oh, we're calling for these topics that we want to like get it published or advert or talk about in our outlets, and that's when I start sending my ideas in. But here's the thing about pitching though. This is something that you have to learn over time. Like even for me, when I started like a year ago, I was a terrible writer. I'm not gonna lie though. Even if you are the greatest writer of what you do, you're always gonna get feedback no matter what. So it's you pretty much be like, hey, I'm Cielo, this and that. And then even in the second paragraph, you pretty much talk about like why should we talk about this topic in your outlet. And then the third part is just like, oh, these are the stuff that I've done. So sometimes like you'll get a lot of more no's than yeses than you think. So it's just like I said, it's kind of like a lottery. But like the whole thing about this process is trying to be always be persistent and be consistent. That's why I'll talk about tips of how to be a better writer too. Like even for me, I'm on my fourth book this month, like reading books. So yeah.
No, that's great. Honestly, I've learned a lot from your progress as a writer, and also coming from what a lot of people might not know is that you also come from a STEM background. You have your bachelor's degree in pharmacy, which I think is like spectacular. But I'm wondering how that also influenced your writing, because you don't come from a journalist background, or like you haven't studied journalism in university or anything like that. So I'm wondering like how has that maybe impacted you, helped you, or even hindered your writing? Or what kind of advice do you have for people who don't have a BA in journalism and would like to pursue journalism professionally, or pitching ideas, or working under publications or things like that?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So, yes, you are correct. I actually have a degree, STEM degree. So, in many ways, it has definitely benefited me as a freelance music journalist or as a writer, because, um, especially in STEM, it's all about facts. Like you have to be very objective of what you're trying to say. Where areas like, you know, and I'm not saying that other fields are very subjective. A lot of times it's very emotional, like it's very like flowery, kind of like fanfic vibes. Like I know that sounds bad, but like it's really important that like when you have a like especially my background in STEM, it's like making sure getting your message across, making sure it's you are objective. Because when I was studying my degree, there was a lot of technical writing. There was a lot of like making sure like this is the message you're trying to relay to the public. You know, that's the same way with journalism. It's like you want to know the truth. Like people, how do I say this? It's like the way that journalism is being viewed nowadays, especially with social media, it's like there's a lot of misinformation out there. And the whole point of journalism, like this is just my opinion, everyone has opinions on it. The whole point of journalism is speaking the truth. Like this is what they're trying to relay the message. And even for me, like as a music journalists, a lot of people don't realize like we see and hear everything before the world knows. So, because I get a bunch of not just press releases, like because I already had these established relationships with these professionals in the music industry, and in other related fields, they're always like, expressing to me what's going on behind the scenes. But I have that information in my hands, but I choose to present information that the world should know about, but not revealing too much because we all have we all have dark secrets. We all have like personal stuff we're going through. So yeah, but just going back to my STEM background, it really did help a lot about the technical sense. And then in terms of like for people who may not have a degree in journalism that still want to pursue writing professionally, I'd say just going back to what I said earlier, just like reading your most favorite topics. Like for me, that's always been music, boy band culture. That's a very reoccurring theme that you'll see in a lot of my writing, especially when I interview mostly male artists, not because I'm biased towards them, it's because I've already specialized in that field enough to be knowing how boy bands are or how they are. And definitely reading a lot of books. Like I had to learn that the hard way because I remember I used to love books as a kid, but as you get older, it's like you're reading stuff that you don't care about, especially if it's assigned to you that you're like, oh my gosh. But because now that I have this time like going to work and have time in between, I was like, you know what? I'll probably just read a lot more self-care books. And I also do want to thank my brother as well because he's the one in our family that's such an avid reader. So he's always just like suggesting me new books I can learn about. Even the most random ones like financial like books like finances. Who doesn't want to talk about finances, right? But yeah, like just picking up on those things, just reading books and just writing down, translating what the overall message is from books. That's why I have like stacks of like journals like sitting around my room. There's even one in my bag. I even carry like a little notepad like writing down thoughts. Like that's how you are as a creative too. You're always writing down something. um what else? Oh, so this is another great tip. If you don't like reading, definitely listen to a bunch of podcasts, like to your favorite podcasts as well. There's actually this one music interviewer. He's very famous in the radio world. His name is Zach Sang. um if you look how he talks to artists, it's not just like he's asking about them, about what they do professionally, but he also just getting to know them as a human being. So those are just like the same practices I apply to when I interview artists because they're also human beings too. So
Yeah, definitely. Zach, I've actually watched a couple of Zach saying or listened to them because I've seen a couple of them. And I love the way that he asks the questions because it feels like a conversational flow. And it's, as a fan, which is generally like correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like most of the audience of a freelance music journalist is probably a fan, barring any like executives or anybody that's like reading it for enhancement of the
right.
artist itself. But most of the time fans are reading these. So yeah, as a fan myself, I enjoy the interviews because I'm like, yeah, you're getting to know them outside of just their career and what they do, but who they are as a person. So I find that really interesting that you brought that up. But you stated before on your LinkedIn and some social media pages that and actually in this podcast, that you're a K-pop fan. And one of the biggest skills that we've preached on this podcast in prior episodes is the power of professionalism while also being a fan, and being able to understand that there's a time and a place to freak out over your favorite artist. And that's probably in the car after the event. But there's the time to be professional, like during the event and when you're around the artist or when you're around other professionals. But what's it been like for you as somebody who's gotten, the opportunity to interview all of these incredible artists and some of whom you are a fan of, and so what tips do you kind of have for not just music journalists writing and interviewing their favorite artist, but anybody that interacts with their favorite artist, like on tour as a tour manager or just,
Oh,
any situation like that?
right. So here's the number one thing. I mean, like, there's already. I'll bring this up, too, because this also applies to as a girl. Um, because the music industry space is still male dominated. I will say this. This is gonna be the hard, cold truth that I will tell to most of my girls who are pursuing this field. But because you are a girl, there's you're already going to be stereotyped as you're trying to get with male artists no matter what. So, and then especially if you're like a very gorgeous girl, obviously they think like, oh, you're trying to get with the executives or higher ups, or trying to get with male artists. Like that's not all of us are like that, right? And second of all, sorry if I sounded aggressive, my apologies. And second, especially a quote unquote fan, that's the thing too, is like you're not taken seriously, because that's when you brought up about the topic about freaking out. There's a time and place for, you know, freaking out over your fans, and there's professionalism. So I actually do want to bring this up because this is what I've been finding lately, like being in this field for a while and discovering some stuff. But not just as music journalists, or like just for people pursuing this field, especially with social media, you know, people can find out everything about you. So whatever you put out there, especially if you're pursuing the music industry, especially, everyone knows each other. So just be really cautious of, just know whatever you put out there, it's out there forever, because some people will take that in. Some people will take that in as like, oh, she's not that serious to her good. It's like, oh, she's, the way she puts herself out there, she's serious about herself. And then I've been finding this too, but there's been a couple music industry professionals, I'm not going to drop names, but there's some people who still have fan accounts or spam accounts for their artists. And especially if you're going to pursue journalism or writing, that's not really a good look, because they think you're just like a stalker or a fan. So you're, especially if you're going to write about like male artists or anything like that. So I told them, like, you really got to be aware, like especially you're taking these steps, making it, going where you need to go, just be cautious of what you post. But yeah, that's the other low-key part no one talks about. There's some fan accounts out there that are actually writers in real life or freelance journalists. So I just tell people like, hey, like even behind those fan accounts, there's actually like, they're they're using that as a way to like research or know more about the artist. But yeah, just being cautious. I'd say.
Yeah, like honestly, I come from the whole fangirl background and I know exactly the the idea of people either taking things too far or um one thing that I'll notice is that people will also link their own like personal life to their fan account, and I think that's, you know, sometimes you have to like toe the line of what is acceptable and what could raise some red flags to people in the professional world.
Yeah.
And so like that's something that I feel like a lot of people don't even consider when they throw their tweets out or they like post a random TikTok or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of sidestepping to what you were saying, but I'm wondering also how you as a woman in a male-dominated industry, and also as a woman of color, how that has also impacted you in being taken seriously. Because I think there's also that whole bias of, oh, this woman is trying to just sleep with the artist, pardon my French, but and that can kind of get in the way of you trying to establish yourself. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I appreciate you for that question, because that's something I also want to talk about as well, because I'm Filipino. So covering K-pop especially, I feel like it, like especially in certain genres, there's a stereotype. It's like, oh, it's a white man covering about rock music. Oh, it's a fangirl like covering like pop music. But in K-pop especially, there's, I feel like Filipino women, how do I say this? There's only cover so much about this genre. And the thing is, I'm gonna talk about K-pop especially because I think that's why I got so blessed to work with K-pop artists and any genre, other genres related to it. Especially in K-pop, a lot of the people in that field are people that look like me. So every time when I email or get in a conversation with them, it's like they feel more comfortable conversing or collaborating with someone that looks like them than someone that looks completely like different from them. You know what I'm saying? Because there's just, it's like when you, and I don't know if it's just like an Asian thing, not trying to stereotype, but it's just like for some reason, especially me as, you know, Asian American living here, it's like you see someone that looks like you feel more comfortable around them. It's like, oh, like I can definitely collaborate with this person rather than someone of the opposite color. And then obviously like K-pop is still not taken as serious, but I think it has, especially here in the States, but it's gotten better over time now that like we are our own genre, that we're all just like any other westernized artists that are being advertised there. And language too. Oh my gosh, I'll talk about this. Because I am fluent in 2 Filipino languages. Um, the people that I collaborate in the K-pop industry, they actually also do speak Tagalog and other Filipino related languages, because Korea and Philippines geographically are in the same area. So it's nice that like I got to connect with them that way rather than someone who just solely speaks English. So if there's any aspiring pros out there like that speak Spanish or any other languages, like please, practice your native languages. It will literally like take you places. It makes things, and you get to learn about them more. So it just like breaks all those barriers down. So yeah.
Yeah, and also going off of that, a lot of the industry in general, no matter which side you want to enter from, we always talk about the importance of networking, and you've also expressed throughout this interview and throughout your career how networking has really helped you. But if at all, do you think networking benefits you in your line of work more than any other type of practice or any type of technique? And is networking really the ultimate key to succeeding in music journalism?
Yeah, so music journalism, I mentioned to this earlier, it's kind of like a lottery. Depending on what field of journalism you're pursuing, like I think it really matters because of the degree. So if you're gonna pursue being a journalist in a newsroom like USA Today or Washington Post, then yes, you have to have a degree in journalism. But in music journalism, I've been finding that a lot of us don't even have degrees in journalism. So I'm just speaking this just on that aspect, music journalism. So a lot of us even come from different backgrounds. In terms of networking, I think that came into an advantage for me because I already started so early on, especially during my college career, like just learning from the alumni network. So even if for anyone out there who's in college right now, like if you have an alumni network for any of the fields you're getting to, please like, reach out to them. Like a lot of us are not as scary as you think. Like that's why I tell people is like, like even just sending them a LinkedIn message, just introducing who you are, and just reaching out, like even especially if it's someone you look up to, like this is where the networking thing like comes in, just reaching out to them and just letting them know like, hey, like I adore your work, like I want to get to know how you got to where you need to be. And if I send messages like that. And another thing too with networking is like don't feel bad if they don't respond, because like they're also busy too, but if they really care they will reach out. So don't ever feel offended like they're not going to respond. But you'll send a bunch of messages or LinkedIn messages, but there's always going to be that one person that's always going to respond. So you just always keep it like simple and sweet. So I still do that until now. Like I'll just be like, you know what, if it's not gonna work, then I just move on. So
Yeah, definitely. I think that it being in the music industry, I don't know if it's that or, being in law school or what, but like I feel like half the time that when I'm not studying is just trying to network. And I think that, like you said, like LinkedIn is such an incredible tool because you can just reach out to anybody and just be like, hey, I like what you do. Do you want to connect? Like something like that, and actually create a conversation with them. And, in the music journalism space, I can't really speak to it, but just in the music industry in general, like a couple of things that have worked for me have just been like, if you have a specific company that you want to work for or anything like that, I've literally typed in the search bar like whatever the company is, and then gone to the people's tab, and
oh
anybody that
yeah.
like am second connections with, or ask my mentor if he knows them. And that's also an amazing way to get connected to people and start your career. So if you're looking for like a quick networking tip, I had to throw that in there for our audience. But yeah, I think it's incredible, like just reaching out, cold emailing, cold messaging.
Yeah, like I make it part of it. Like I'll send this is another tip I want to talk about to networking. Like make it part of your routine. Like even on your emails, there's a setting in your emails where you can schedule out sending emails or messages for the week, so that way it doesn't feel like, oh, I missed out on like networking this person. Like I do it at the big, like I do it on a Sunday or early Monday morning. I schedule it out every week, so that way I'm not like like invading like their personal time and space, just so like it's very consistent. So here's another thing about networking I want to talk about. Like I've definitely gained some people and you made long-term relationships with them. And I've also lost people along the way. So unfortunately that long-term relationship I had with them is no longer there. But I don't like using the word networking a lot, because a lot of the times when you meet some, especially if it's some where you want to go, where you want to be, especially in any field you pursue, like you want to, I try to be very genuine with like every person that I meet. So like there's this one person, like um it was a music, I'm just not gonna mention his name just for privacy reasons. I remember meeting this one person. He used to be like a creative director for a big name outlet, and I respected him so much because the way he carries himself. And we actually connected to our A&R friend for a label. It just so happened like I was just with her, and then all of a sudden she was just like, oh, this is my friend, blah blah blah, and all of a sudden we just like clicked right away. So just make, even if you can make a friendship out of it, that's great as well, because I think that just makes things like easier as you like network as you go. But I just tell people, it's like, don't look at it as like, oh my god, I have to like network. Like we all hate that word. Like, let's be real though, like networking. But if you can be genuine and just being intentional with your action, what you want to do, like people will see that. Like even on social media, like I do have a big social media following, my Instagram and my LinkedIn, but like I like to post things that I truly care about, so that way when people see that, they can be like, oh, I can take her seriously, she's very genuine. Because I'll tell you this too, there's also sharks in this field. Like you'll meet people that you're like, oh, they are not what I thought, how they are, how they present themselves online than they are in real life. So just making sure you're being around people that not only you make you feel good about being yourself, but you also feel like, oh, I can definitely see myself like being around them in the long term. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the exception to that, exactly, is being very intentional, but also never actually walking up to somebody that that you admire and saying, can I have a job? Like, it should always be to learn.
I'll bring this up too. So that's another thing I wanted to talk about. So there's so many things. Oh my gosh, I could talk about forever. But especially in the music journalism space, because we have so many, we're literally the people that have direct contacts with these people that we work with, especially. But I've definitely come across some aspiring pros that, especially on LinkedIn too, like because that's where I post a lot more consistently for my professionalism stuff. They would literally just message me. It's like, hey, I saw you interviewed this and that, can I have their direct contact? It's like, hold up, like I don't know you very well, like you didn't even introduce yourself. So that's why I always emphasize to people is like, you can't just go up to someone right away, be like, can I have a job, like you said. Like make it, like just build that, like establish that at first when you're meeting someone first time, like, hey, I'm this and that. I like, this is what I like to do. Hope you like it. So, like it's not as hard as people think. People overthink. And I said, trust me, it makes it so much easier if you really admire this person, especially someone you respect so much. Like, just take the time getting to know them. We all crave like, let's be real. We all crave some kind of attention, feeling important, and we want to feel like we are being recognized for what we do. So it also makes me feel good that like other people that follow my work, they say like, hey, you've literally inspired me to like be genuine and actually be intentional what you do, because people will see that no matter how many, I get threats too. I'm not gonna lie though, as a journalist, you get threats about from fans, like those things, but I choose to not pay attention to that because I got people that that love me and I love them back. So
Yeah, exactly. No, totally. Yeah, there's such a fine line between, the privacy and aspect of it, and the not overstepping your bounds. I think it also could tie right back into the fan thing. But yeah, it's like you admire them, so learn from them, and if you genuinely have a passion for what they're doing, all you'll really want is to learn from them. And and they'll see that too, like they'll see that genuineness. So I love that.
and it's just like it really will, like people will see that. Like I know it's hard at first, like why am I not getting all these opportunities? I just tell people is like, once you start putting yourself out there and just being intentional, this is another life lesson, just being intentional what you really like to do, like people will see that. Like, oh my gosh, like let's be real though, like that's another thing too, is like we all talk behind each other's backs, but I will say that you realize you run into the same people as more often than anything, especially in the online space for journalism. There's people that talk each other behind each other's back all the time, and I choose not to like pay attention to that. It's like, what can you get from that? Like, right? So that's why, like, there's another thing too. I also have to shut off social media in some aspects. Like, I don't even have TikTok anymore. I actually deleted that a year ago. So people are very shocked when they learn that. It's like, why don't you have TikTok? And I was like, I don't have TikTok because a lot of the times, like, it fills your mind with things that you don't want to like. I rather fill my mind with things that I care about than some things that I don't care about. So yeah. So that's another thing I tell people. It's like making sure, like, please make sure the information you are retaining, like, or absorbing, making sure, like, using your own judgment, and those kinds of things. Oh my gosh, I'm even going off topic.
No, I love it. I think the audience is absolutely gonna love it too. Kelly, did you have something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've thought that was really compelling because I also, ironically, considering I manage social media for Jaded, I also have put so many app blockers and limitations on all my social media to stop going on it because I've noticed it's not good for my mental health. But I think it also in the journalist aspect, it kind of biases your work too, even if it's implicit, like you consume a lot of media, even if it's like pop culture related, and you kind of have this like inclination to write in a certain way to appease a certain type of like perspective or like a certain preference from your audience or things like that. But I think it can also completely like change the way you think about things, and I think that's
Oh,
another thing that would be really interesting to like talk about.
oh, yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you for bringing that up because even for me, I feel like I learned not only not myself but also just the world in general. Like, especially with K-pop, I've learned how to be more culturally aware of like certain things. And I'm a huge history nerd, so it just comes into play. Like, I get to learn about like people from all aspects of life. Um, and then even for me, like, I've always been like a public speaker type, but um even over time, like, here I am a year later doing, especially for music journalism, I feel like my interviewing style has gotten better. It doesn't sound very like rehearsed or choppy at first. um I mean, I did do some interview with small artists in my college radio, but that was just more of like a casual thing. This is more in a like a serious thing where people look at what you write. But hopefully someday I wanted to have my own little show, kind of like a Zach Sting style show, but that's down the line. But right now, I'm just focused on the goals that I have, just leading to where I need to go. So,
That's awesome. Yeah. So, Cielo, as we wrap up here, have you ever gotten a little jaded? And how do you come back to yourself and the work that you love if you do?
oh yeah, I'm actually going through that right now. Yeah. So, it's especially it's someone that you're truly passionate about. There, that side of it is also gonna drain you out. So, I always dedicate the stuff that I'm passionate about during the weekdays, but on the weekends off, I use my weekends off to just not do anything. Just literally spend time with your loved ones because, like, you're already putting in so much. You're already hustling and like working so hard to where you need to go, but you need to also make time for just like, taking time off because, like, this 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 will happen to some of you too. It's like, I'm sure you've gotten to conversation, hey, you dedicate so much time for this thing you're passionate about, why aren't you spending time with us? So I've gotten that feedback before. It's like, oh, you talk so much about what you do, but it's like, and like, then there's some others that are like, oh, you come off as braggy because this is the only thing you talk about. It's like, I'm not being braggy, this is just, it's literally my life, right? So just communicate too, because as a journalist, we're literally on our phones, like, just researching stuff, but like, just letting like your coworkers know, or letting people, the person you're going to collaborate with, just communicate with them. It's like, hey, I need this time off. I just want you guys to know I'm not putting my best work at this time. So I mean, even in August, I took like 1 month off just to not do anything writing or music related, just because, like, I was just kind of lost and I just felt everything was just overwhelming. So I even told people, like the people that were reaching out to me to interview artists, I was like, I just need time off. Like we can do, there's always going to be something down the line. That don't ever feel guilty too if you decline an opportunity, but you have to come first before what you're passionate about or anything you like. So
Yeah, I love that self-care all the way for sure. That's
yeah.
awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Cielo. We really appreciate you being here and giving your insight into the world of music journalism. I certainly learned a lot.
Yeah.
But thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you. And I also want to thank Kelly as well. And with you, Jade, I've seen you like grown a lot, even though we haven't talked. Like I've seen people like progressing, the past few years. So
Thank
and
you.
Kelly too. I still Kelly's my homie, but
No, it was such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I mean, it's like my first time co-hosting, and what better way to do it than with like one of my closest industry friends.
yeah.
That's just proof that like genuine connections go a long way, because I met Cielo through well, not even networking, just like being in the same environments a few years ago, and we've been close ever since.
Yeah,
So yeah.
like I tell people it's like network if you wanna make it a long-term thing, don't look at it as like, oh, I have to network. Be intentional with people you meet because you never know. Like I promise you that like it will there's gonna be things down the line that open doors to as long as you're being intentional, being genuine with what you do and just making those long-term relationships. So
Yeah.
That is the perfect note to end on. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. And this has been another episode of A Little Jaded.